Walk far enough into almost any forest in New England, and the trees will eventually part around something strange. A low wall of stacked stone, furred with moss, running straight through the wilderness. No house, no road, no reason for it to be here. And yet it goes on for miles, vanishing under roots and leaf litter. Someone built this by hand where there is now only forest. The question is not who, the question is what happened here. This is the story of the largest forest comeback in the history of North America, and it began almost entirely by accident. 2 centuries ago, New England was not the green and wooded place we picture today. It was open country. Cleared fields ran from the coast of Maine down to the hills of Connecticut, stitched together by fences of stone. At its height, roughly 4 out of every 5 acres in southern New England stood bare to the sky, plowed, grazed, and worked from first light until dark. Then the people left. And over the next 150 years, the trees came back. Nearly 12 million acres of farmland, given up and allowed to return to the wild. What grew back was not simply a forest, it was a new world. And the animals that had vanished from these hills would one day walk them again. But to understand what came back, you first have to understand what was lost. When the first European settlers arrived on this coast in the 1600s, they stepped into a forest so vast it seemed to have no edge. Towering white pines, oaks centuries old, chestnuts so wide a family could shelter inside a hollow trunk. To the people stepping off those ships, this was not beauty. It was an obstacle. The forest was darkness and danger, and most of all, it was in the way. A farm could not exist beneath a canopy of trees, so they did the only thing they knew how to do. They began to cut. For the next 200 years, the sound that defined New England was the sound of the axe. Tree by tree, acre by acre, the settlers opened the land. They burned the slash, pulled the stumps, and turned the soil to the sun. A single family might spend an entire lifetime clearing a few dozen acres of hillside. Their children would clear more. By the time the young United States was finding its feet, the great forest of the Northeast had been pushed back to ribbons along the steepest ridges and the wettest swamps. Everywhere else, there was sky. And everywhere, there were stones. This is the part the settlers never expected. New England sits on top of the bones of an ancient mountain range, ground down and scattered by glaciers that retreated only 12,000 years ago. Those glaciers left behind a soil seeded with rock. Every spring, the frost would heave a fresh crop of stones to the surface, as if the earth itself were refusing to be tamed. A farmer would clear a field one year and find it studded with new boulders the next. The land grew stones the way it grew crops. So the farmers did what farmers do, they moved them. Day after day, season after season, they pried the stones loose, loaded them onto wooden sleds called stone boats, and hauled them to the edges of their fields. At first, the walls were nothing more than tidy piles of trash, the most convenient place to dump a thing nobody wanted. But as the farms prospered, those piles became walls, stacked, fitted, squared at the corners. Boundaries between neighbors, pens for livestock, lines of order drawn across a stubborn land. No one set out to build a wonder, but that is what they built. The geologist Robert Thorson, who has spent decades studying these walls, estimates that at their peak in the middle of the 1800s, New England held somewhere between 240,000 and 250,000 miles of stone wall. Stop and let that number settle. That is enough stone, laid end to end, to wrap around the entire planet 10 times over. It is more stone by sheer volume than the Great Wall of China, Hadrian's Wall in Britain, and the Pyramids of Egypt, all of them combined. 400 million tons of rock, lifted and carried one stone at a time, by the hands of people who simply wanted to grow food. Thorson once calculated that building them all took something on the order of 40 million days of labor, more than 100,000 years of human work, hidden now beneath the leaves. For a time, the labor paid off, and one animal, more than any other, drove the hills to their barest point. In the year 1808, Napoleon's armies invaded Spain, and in the chaos, a treasure slipped out of the country that Spain had guarded for centuries: the merino sheep. These animals carried the finest wool in the world, and suddenly they were flooding into New England. A sheep craze swept the region. Farmers cleared still more land, knocked down still more forest, and built still more wall to fence their flocks. By the 1830s, parts of Vermont held more sheep than people. The hills were shaved to grass from horizon to horizon. Standing on a ridgeline then, you could see for miles, and almost every mile of it was open. It was a landscape of fences and flocks and small, hard-won farms. One of those farms, generations later, would belong to a young poet named Robert Frost, who lived in Derry, New Hampshire, in the early 1900s. Frost watched his neighbors meet him each spring to repair the stone wall that ran between their land, and out of that ritual, he wrote a poem the whole world would come to know. It gave us the line, "Good fences make good neighbors." But Frost was writing at the very end of an age. By the time he set those words on paper, the world that had built the walls was already disappearing. The farms were emptying, and the reason had almost nothing to do with the land itself. The reason was a ditch in New York. In the year 1825, after 8 years of digging, the Erie Canal opened across the state of New York. It was a channel of water just 4 feet deep, but it changed the destiny of an entire region. For the first time, a farmer in the flat and fertile country of Ohio could load grain onto a barge and float it cheaply all the way to the markets of the East Coast. And that grain was grown on soil that made New England's hill farms look like a cruel joke. Out west, the land was deep and black and smooth and free of stones. No glacier had cursed it with rock. A plow could run for a mile without striking a single boulder. The New England farmer could not compete, and he knew it. Why break your back on a thin, stony hillside, fighting the frost for a few bushels of wheat, when the same crop could be grown 100 times more easily 1,000 miles away? The arithmetic was merciless. And so the Great Leaving began. It started as a trickle and became a flood. Sons who would have inherited the family farm packed up and moved west to claim land of their own. Daughters left for the textile mills rising along the rivers, where a wage could be earned indoors, out of the weather. When gold was discovered in California in the year 1848, the hills emptied faster still. Whole towns thinned out, whole valleys went quiet. The farmhouses were left to sag, the barns to lean, and the fields to whatever came next. By the middle of the 1800s, across the uplands of New England, the most powerful force shaping the land was no longer the plow. It was absence, and nature, as it always does, moved into the empty space. Here is the thing about a field that no one is tending. It does not stay a field for long. The first summer, the grass grows tall and goes to seed. Then the wind and the birds begin their quiet work, carrying in the seeds of the trees from the woodlots and the fence rows that had been left standing. In New England, one tree above all others was waiting for its chance: the eastern white pine. Its seeds are light, winged, and built to travel on the breeze, and they will sprout in bright, open ground where other trees cannot. Within a few short years of a farm being abandoned, a green haze of young pine would appear across the old pasture. Within a decade, it was a thicket. Within 30 years, it was a forest. These new woods even earned a name. Foresters called them Old Field White Pine, because they rose so faithfully on the bones of the abandoned farms. And by the time the calendar turned to the 1910s, those pines had grown tall and straight and valuable. A second harvest arrived, this time of timber rather than crops. The pines were cut, the sawmills hummed, and in the clearings left behind, a different forest began to climb. Oak and maple, birch and ash, the hardwoods that make the New England autumn blaze. Slowly, the land was healing into something that looked almost like what the settlers had found 4 centuries before. Almost, but not quite. We will come back to that. The scale of this recovery is difficult to grasp, so let the numbers do it for you. Researchers at the Harvard Forest, an outdoor laboratory in the town of Petersham, Massachusetts, have spent more than a century tracking this transformation acre by acre. Their director, the ecologist David Foster, has shown that in central New England alone, more than 9 million acres of cleared farmland had already grown back into forest before the year 1900. Across the whole of the region, the total farmland that was opened and then surrendered to the trees climbs toward 12 million acres. A territory larger than many entire nations, abandoned by people and reclaimed by the wild, without a single tree ever being planted by human hands. Today, the result of that great leaving is all around. New England, which 2 centuries ago was perhaps the most thoroughly cleared corner of the continent, is now one of the most heavily forested regions in the United States. Roughly 80% of it stands under trees. The proportion has almost exactly reversed. The land that was 4/5 open is now 4/5 forest. And running through nearly every acre of those new woods, like ghosts of the world that was, are the stone walls. They never moved. The fields vanished, the farmers vanished, the very memory of the farms vanished, but the walls stayed exactly where they were laid. Today, around 120,000 miles of them still thread through the forest, silent, mossy, and patient, marking the edges of fields that no longer exist. Now, about that word, transformed. Because the forest that returned was not the forest that was lost, and the difference is a quiet tragedy folded inside a triumph. When the settlers first arrived, one tree had ruled these woods above all others: the American chestnut. It was a giant, sometimes 100 feet tall, and in some forests as many as 1 in 4 trees was a chestnut. It fed everything. Its nuts rained down each autumn in such abundance that they fattened deer, bears, turkeys, and whole communities of people who roasted them, sold them, and fed them to their livestock. The chestnut was the beating heart of the eastern forest. And then, in the year 1904, a fungus arrived from across the ocean on imported nursery stock. The chestnut blight spread through the forests of the east like a slow fire, and against it, the American chestnut had no defense at all. Within 40 years, billions of trees were dead. An entire species, the king of the canopy, was reduced to little more than stumps that still, even now, send up doomed shoots that sicken before they can ever bear fruit. So when we say the forest came back, we have to be honest. It came back changed. The new woods of oak and maple are beautiful and alive, but they are not a copy of what stood before. The chestnut is gone. The forest that grew over the stone walls is a new forest, a younger and a different one, shaped as much by what we lost as by what recovered. That is what transformed means. Not a return to the past, the birth of something new. And into that new world, the animals returned. This may be the most astonishing chapter of all, because when the hills were bare in the 1800s, New England had been emptied of its wildlife almost as completely as its forests. The beaver had been trapped out for the fur trade, gone from the region for generations. The wild turkey had been hunted to nothing. The black bear had retreated to the last remote corners. The moose was a memory. White-tailed deer had grown so scarce that seeing one was an event. A naturalist walking those open hills in 1850 would have found a landscape strangely silent, swept clean of its largest creatures. Then the forest grew back, and with it came the food and the cover and the space, and one by one, the animals came home. The beaver returned first, spreading down the streams, building their dams, and flooding the lowlands into wetlands alive with herons and frogs and fish. The wild turkey came back, helped along by people who carried breeding birds into the recovering woods, until flocks of them once again moved through the autumn leaves. The white-tailed deer rebounded so completely that today it thrives in the suburbs. The black bear followed the forest as it thickened, climbing back into hills it had not roamed in a century. The fisher, a fierce and shadowy weasel the size of a cat, slipped back through the canopy. The bobcat returned to hunt the stone walls where mice now nest. The bald eagle, once nearly gone, wheels again over the rivers. And then came the one that no one quite believed: the moose. The largest animal in the New England woods, standing taller at the shoulder than a man, an animal of the deep northern wilderness, began to walk south again into Massachusetts and Connecticut, into woods that 2 centuries earlier had been somebody's sheep pasture. Imagine standing on a New England hillside today and watching a bull moose step out of the trees in a place where, within living memory of the land, there was nothing but open field and the endless lines of stone. The wilderness did not just survive, it returned, and it brought its giants with it. This is the quiet miracle written across the whole region. Not a wilderness that was protected, but a wilderness that was abandoned. And that healed itself anyway. It is one of the most hopeful stories in all of conservation, and almost no one planned a single part of it. The forest did the work. All it needed was for people to step back, and for time to be given the room to do what time does. But this story does not end with a promise that the forest is safe forever, because there is a new pressure on the land now, and it is worth understanding clearly. The same researchers at the Harvard Forest who measured the Great Recovery have also measured something troubling. New England is now losing forest again, this time not to the plow, but to the pavement. Roads, houses, parking lots, and development are clearing the trees at a rate of around 65 acres every single day. If that pace holds, the region could lose well over 1 million more acres of its woods in the coming decades. And this kind of clearing is different from the old kind. A field can grow back into forest. A shopping center cannot. When the land is paved, the second chance is gone. David Foster has called this moment exactly that. A second chance. New England was handed a gift it never earned. A vast forest returned to it for free by the simple fact of people walking away. The question now is whether we are wise enough to keep it, whether we can look at those woods and those walls and that returning wildlife and decide that some of it is worth protecting on purpose this time rather than by accident. Which brings us back, in the end, to where we began, to that low wall of stone running straight through the forest, far from any road. Now you know what it is. It is the edge of a field that fed a family 200 years ago. It is the labor of hands long gone, lifting stone after stone out of a stubborn soil. It is the boundary of a world that emptied out and was swallowed by the trees. And it is, if you let it be, a kind of monument. A monument to loss, yes. The farms failed, the chestnut fell. A whole way of life faded into the woods. But it is also a monument to something far more hopeful. It is proof, written in stone and trees, that the land is patient and that nature is not finished with us. Given time and given space and given the chance, the wild will return. It will climb back over our walls and our boundaries and our best intentions, and it will fill the empty places with pine and oak, with beaver and bear and moose, until the field becomes a forest again and the silence becomes birdsong. The people who built these walls believed they were taming the wilderness for good. They were wrong, and it is the most beautiful kind of wrong there is. The wilderness was only waiting, and when we finally turned and walked away, it came home. So the next time you find a wall of moss-covered stone deep in the New England woods, stop for a moment. Lay your hand on it. You are standing at the border of two worlds, the one we made and the one that grew back over it. And the forest all around you, alive and breathing and wild, is the quiet, patient answer to a question the settlers never thought to ask. What happens when you give the earth a little room to heal? It heals.